So Michel, thanks so much for joining us. We're going to be here talking about marketing in a kind of publishing role and then a wider kind of e-commerce and retail role. So I guess a kind of good place for us to start would be how, in your opinion, do you think CMOs are kind of gauging sentiment today?
Well, I guess there's different channels at play. So basically you want to gauge sentiment across all the different channels that your customers interact with. You can look at it from a social media perspective, obviously, which is the most obvious one, where you think people are going to ask questions, post comments, even create their own content. It's called user-generated content. You have people talking about their experience in store, if you're into retail. And you also will be able on social to sort of perceive soft signals around when people are about to churn. So that's one. There's the website. Traditional metrics around websites is how you engage with customers with traffic, obviously, but also time spent on page. Any other kind of metrics around the average order value, if you're into e-commerce, conversion rates, and the others. Live chat is a new one, rather new one, which is interesting because then you have conversations where people are more, sort of directly interacting with you. So it's about response time, how good you are with your customers in that space. Email marketing is another channel, and then you have the traditional metrics around click-through rates, open rates, where people, how people, what reasons people unsubscribe for, and so forth. And then more recently, mobile is taking now a big chunk of the traffic. So people with an app want also to have stats and sentiment analysis around the users, how often they use the device, what kind of particular features in the app will they use, and so forth. And then then you have the more traditional sentiment areas with NPS scores. You capture the Net Promoter Score in stores or online, and then ask questions about the experience and so forth. So it's really multiple. I guess the challenge is around unifying those data sets and making sure you have something that is interoperable across different channels. But then obviously, when you talk about gauging sentiment, it could be also the sentiment of someone else, but the customer. Customer is obviously at the center, but you want to gauge sentiment around your employees, potentially, how they feel about the brand, how they feel about the business, and then obviously, last but not least, but the investors or the owners of the business or the partners are usually also an interesting space to watch with regards to how your brand is doing. So I guess for the CMO, it's looking at all these kind of metrics in different spaces and making sure, obviously the first thing you want to make sure is the customer is well served across different metrics, is well addressed, is well spoken to, and then you measure the other KPIs that matter to you.
So it sounds like there's a lot of data out there to be measured. And
absolutely.
And so how do you kind of prioritize that data? Like, what are the kind of core pillars to that data that you look for?
Well, I guess before you prioritize anything to do with data, is you want to make sure you prioritize your customers. So there's a big thing around putting the customer at the heart of what you do. Everyone's saying they do that, but how do you make that happen in reality? And it's increasingly the task of a CMO to achieve that and take responsibility for the customer experience. So before you even talk about data sets, you talk about how do you make sure the customer experience is right and fit for purpose and fit for the brand. Because we were talking just now about user-generated comment, how customers interact with you. But I feel that increasingly what makes or breaks a brand is how you interact with customers, and particularly what customers say about your brand behind your back. And that's really something that marketeers need to address. Is what is our reputation? What are the conversations that are going on about us, and whether those conversations can go viral, whether you have enough advocates versus the detractors, and what conversations they have, what stories do they tell about you. So that's one thing. And then there's I've noticed that there's a few people saying that this year 2017 is the year when almost 90% of marketers will expect customer experience to be their primary differentiator. That's what Gartner says, I think. And that's interesting because you could think customer experience is a commodity. In the same way data can be a commodity. But actually, how do you differentiate in that space is the other question. As a marketer, you're thinking, well, who are the trendsetters? Amazon for commerce, maybe Uber for services, and then quite a few industries are being now completely made not redundant, but I guess becoming commodities. Think about utilities, banking, probably insurance as well soon. So how do you innovate in that space is a question. And how do you make sure that your customers will have an experience that they can compare with any other experience they have? Because what they compare you with now is not necessarily your competitor, your traditional competitor. Is any given service or company that provides an experience, and they'll have that kind of bedrock. So, yeah.
And so, just to go back to that sort of the mentioning of like the Amazons and the Googles of this world, from a CMO perspective, is it about emulating those guys and what they do, or is it going, okay, this is what Amazon and Google do, and they do it very well? Mm-hmm. Where do we fit into that story? Like, is it about trying to out Google, or is it about trying to find a smaller sort of niche for you guys?
Well, I guess it's first looking at your business in a new way, in such a way that you think, what makes us unique in this world nowadays. Obviously, you won't necessarily be able to compete with Amazon. The scale is different, and the way it's been constructed is not necessarily to be profitable. You may have a business where your owners expect profitability in the shorter term than Amazon does for them. So your agenda is not the same. And at the end of the day, if you try to compete there, you may be in for a long and painful journey. Whereas if you start thinking, how do we differentiate? What makes us unique? What is our core asset? Where are we credible and trusted? Then maybe you start in a better place where you can not necessarily compete, but at least differentiate in whichever space you want to operate. So take timing, for instance. We agreed that, we are in a market that is not necessarily growing as such. I mean, print magazines are not a growth area right now. There's areas of hope with regards to digital advertising, which is helping stabilize the loss in print advertising. But for the last 8 to 10 years, it's not been a growth market. So where else can we grow is the real question, based on the assets that we have, based on the data sets that we have, and we may want to come back to that, is really what the real questions we asked ourselves. So we are strong in quite a few verticals, more specialty areas like sports, like music, like wine, you name them. There's quite a few areas where we feel there's a really saliency about timing. And based on those facts and the reality of being, the leader in that market, we also thought, why should we restrict ourselves to do just magazines or even digital media or content? So we went into an exploration phase, which was about interrogating those ecosystems we operate in, and start to think, what if we came with a different proposition for the same customers that are passionate about something? Because at the end of the day, it's yes, there's data, but there's more importantly the storytelling element. That's our core, and passion points that sit with the customers. So if we address the right passion points with the right content and think adjacent markets, then we can start doing events, we can start doing e-commerce, we can start doing a lot of other things that come on top of our core, which is content or storytelling, and join the dots between content and commerce.
So it sounds like with a legacy brand like Time that has come from a very different world and is trying to shift into a very new world in that sense, it's not about tearing all the old stuff down and starting afresh. It's very much about like teasing out what are the strong points that still exist and then building those out into that.
Spot on. It's about leveraging assets that we know we have. It's about building on the trust that we have with customers who are passionate about things that they read about. It's about engaging with customers in new ways, in new formats, and it's about really going into those markets that are growing rather than sticking and trying to protect at all costs markets that are not necessarily growing. I mean, obviously, we want go about and accelerate the decline in print. We're trying to protect those revenues. They are important and they make sense. But we are finding new ways to reach out to the same customers, whether they are our end customers, so the consumer, or whether they are the brands that advertise with us, reach out to them with a more global proposition. So it could be moving from you know, subscriptions to membership, where people can have access to more than just the content. It could be for our brand advertisers offering services, which we do actually, around content creation, native advertising, programmatic advertising, and diversifying the portfolio of options that we offer them.
So is there any example that kind of, at the top of your head, that would really kind of signify how that shift has happened at time that you could talk about?
Well, a couple of recent examples could be around cycling, for instance. Cycling is a very big niche in the UK, and we've acknowledged that we have a very strong portfolio of brands in that space, starting with Cycling Weekly. Based on that, and based on very in-depth insights that we have on who the passionate cyclist is and what they do in their journey and their different touch points, then we've acknowledged that our brands in that space are trusted and well trusted enough for us to move in adjacent markets. We started with partnership with, for instance, UKCE, which is a UK cycling events business, and more recently have acquired that business to make them more joined up with the core content that we have. So that's one example. And then when you think about it, at the end of the day, adding events plus content plus data is making 1 + 1 = 3 or 4 rather than just 2.
Right. And so with a company like Time that has lots of different departments and teams and publications and different directions, I guess, or goals individually, how do you get them all to kind of like pull together as a kind of collective company?
Well, that's a different challenge, and here you're touching on the cultural element. I mean, first of all, you need to deal with a transformation that goes beyond joining people together and work together when you acquire a new business. That's kind of traditional merger and acquisition work. I think the first cultural shift is moving people thinking customer rather than thinking content first. So it's having that kind of mentality around what are the customers after, what do they want, and based on that, trying to offer something more global. So there's that shift around the customer, and then I mean, there's this famous maturity model, which goes step by step, 7 stages, I think it is. The first one is get buy-in. Is about connecting people around the same goals, having the same vision that is shared across the business. I mentioned it around the cultural piece, but then about data, for instance, is about collecting all the data in one environment and connecting the different sets of data. And then it's about using those sets of data in the right way. Second stage is breaking silos, so working more in a matrix mode and creating cross-functional teams that really cooperate. So when you're talking about a project, then people, experts from different areas can join up. We also agreed we'd share content between business units, and when you have 50 brands, it's kind of a tough thing culturally also to move from a space where people were working in very small niches and silos to cooperating and thinking globally as a unit. And then it's about understanding what customers do. So mapping the customer journeys really to start understanding how customers move from one touch point to another and involve the right people at the right time. Then comes the challenge of the platform, what solutions you put in place, and we are really fortunate and happy with having delivered a single view of the customer database where all our data points are now collectively gathered. And then the next stages will be around the seamless experience for the customers across different touch points, and hopefully more personalization, more better interactions with customers, and bringing this emotional element into play as well. So yeah, we're halfway through, I would say, but it's in a good place.
And in terms of sort of like, the tools that you use, obviously we touched upon earlier the idea of a lot of data sets and a lot of different places that you can extract knowledge and understanding. And I imagine there's also a lot of different tools that you guys use in the kind of marketing space. So how do you kind of like get those to work together, to get that collaborative togetherness?
Well, tools, there's this saying that a fool with a tool is still a fool. So the tools in themselves, I guess, my opinion is they're not that important. What's really important is, again, coming back to the culture piece, is governance and people. It's being able to bring together marketing and IT and have them work, align them around the same vision, the same goals, the same KPIs even. So same bonus structure, for instance. And I've seen that at play in retail. It really works well when you have IT that is, really servicing the business rather than thinking what solution, what tool, what next toy can we get for the business. Then there's an element of training. You want to grow people. It's not something that comes naturally. So you want people to speak the same language, and therefore you need to address the training bit. And here in this business, at Time Inc., we have online courses to train people around all things to do with digital advertising. So you can take your own courses across the business so that people relate to the same things. Same applies to digital courses. So we use a company called Circus Street. I've seen in e-commerce that, again, those kind of, unified e-learning platforms exist. There's a certificate of online business for digital marketing and e-commerce, which is really powerful as well. So it's kind of culture-wise, you can definitely train people and offer them to grow in their roles, and actually that helps also with them being scared about their own position, because it's digital is often seen as a threat for people who come from the old world. And then you need to find and grow people who are going to be the champions of that change and that transformation, and have them lead teams, cross-functional teams, and create, rather than create silos again, create virtual teams where you involve the best people. So sort of centers of excellence kind of ways of working.
So it sounds like the traditional model, in any business where marketing will be a department of itself, and it will be involved in some conversations, but not all conversations across the business. It sounds like there's been a real kind of blurring of those boundaries, and sort of, like everyone's becoming a marketer, right? Because that's the digital world. That's what it is. Everyone's a kind of a brand unto themselves, and also their own audience and all that kind of stuff. Is that something you'd agree with?
I sort of agree with it. Marketing is common sense at the core. And everyone is allowed to have common sense, and may the best idea win. Then there's a structure around it. It has to be measured. It has to be around, what are we trying to achieve? What is the customer journey? And how is that, compatible with our brand, is what marketers also will have as a sort of guardians of the temple of the brand. But again, you need to acknowledge that customers want what customers want, and they are in charge nowadays. So it's about aligning people in the business so that everyone thinks customer first and actually agrees that this is the most important thing to consider. Once that's achieved, I guess you can have any kind of debates and conversations. If the end winner is the customer, it's the right thing to do. That's why you have these new roles that, chief customer officer kind of roles in some businesses rather than marketing.
Right, okay, so it's very much a customer focus.
Correct.
Right. And then just to, going back to that sort of deluge of data that, companies like Time Inc. now face, how do you kind of prioritize that wealth of data, and how because again, there's a tendency to be drowned in it by the data.
True.
So how do you kind of like organize that and strategize on that?
I guess the first thing is around acquiring the right data sets, because there's always this, this feeling that we should acquire everything, capture everything. What are we going to do with it? So if you want to have a big data problem, then start with having a big data strategy and pick the right data sets that are fit for purpose. So it's thinking through, if we capture this information, what are we going to do with it? And actually, even better is what's in it for the customer, because it's a trade thing. And at the edge of GDPR, it's going to be even more that. It's, okay, I'm happy to give you my data as a customer. What are you going to do with it? And what's in it for me is the real question. So getting that sorted, agreeing on that, and then making sure you capture data sets that are consistent across the board so that you can compare, you can leverage the whole data set. So the minimal requirements should be the same. And then if you go into specialisms, then maybe you want more in-depth data around preferences and things like that. And, so one is collecting data with a purpose. Two is use it with the customer in mind and add value to the interactions that you have with customers. So it's how you use data, who's allowed to do that, thinking in terms of ROI. Say you have 1 million emails in your database. Who's going to be able to use them? Who's got the best return on that sort of investment that you made in capturing email data? That's also, challenges that for the business sometimes you think are not necessarily obvious. So again, agreeing on KPIs, ways to measure performance, and prioritize with performance in mind.
So would you say there are there's with data, some data is useful and actionable and accurate, and some data could be a bit of a red herring in the sense that it could lead you down a path that make a mistake essentially.
Exactly. And there's lots of people commenting on the fact that if you torture data long enough, it will say whatever you want to say, and that's true. So simple is beautiful in that space, I think. And sometimes you want to start really simple. And again, it's also about testing. I think the cultural shift, as it stands right now, is as much as it is around customer focus, customer centricity. Working in Matrix, it's also about making sure that you don't focus too much on the data, and you start thinking, let's test what we think is the right thing to do. Let's test and learn, do proof of concept projects, rather than rely on one analyst to tell you this is the strategy and the vision.
So there's a real sense then that there has to be some rigor with the data.
Absolutely.
That turns into actions and then turns into a strategy.
Exactly.
Okay. And then just lastly, we've touched upon this quite a lot already, how enterprises are really changing themselves to be more customer focused. And if we think about Time Inc., it was a publisher, it was a magazine publisher, and its service audience still is, obviously. But obviously it's now in a new age, and it now has to think about customers differently, and has to and put them almost at the top of the pyramid rather than somewhere.
Well, Time Inc., I think, is seeing themselves as a storytelling company rather than just a publisher. So storytelling is probably one of the oldest jobs ever. And if you think about it, you can tell stories across all kind of medium and channels. So that opens a lot of opportunities. In the same way, it's a big challenge. So this is the core. There's a data play at stake. So how much data can you capture? If you want to compete with the Googles and the ones you called out in the beginning of this conversation, definitely data is going to be one of the key things to look at. But who best than a magazine publisher can tell the right stories that engage with your passion points? That's the differentiator.
Yeah. So you pretty much, again, to go back to it's that using your strengths as best as possible.
Absolutely.
Great.
Growing them.
Excellent. Well, that's it, Michel. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.